Nothing in the teleprompter. Hey, everybody, I'm Vladimir Duthiers. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. Check out these monitors behind me here. These are feeds coming into the CBS News Broadcast Center from all of our stations and affiliates around the country and around the world. We're going to get to a lot this morning. Let's dig into it. Russia launches a massive attack on Ukraine's capital hours after peace talks stall. It also comes as President Trump is blaming the Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for prolonging the war. Plus, a major reversal for President Trump in the trade war with China. Markets were up yesterday. Hear what he's saying right now about a deal with possible countries. And up in flames, thousands of acres have been torched in New Jersey as crews work to put out a major flame that is still making air conditions in New York City and in the tri-state area very, very dire. This is CBS News 24/7. But let's begin in Ukraine, where Russia launched a massive aerial bombardment across the country overnight. That attack killed at least 8 people and injured dozens more in Kyiv. In response to the attack, President Trump has taken aim at Russian leader Vladimir Putin, urging him to stop, saying the strikes were, quote, not necessary. Following developments for us from London is CBS News senior foreign correspondent Holly Williams. Holly, what can you tell us about this latest Russian attack? To have the president actually tweeting to Vladimir Putin is remarkable.
Yeah, that was very interesting. Good morning, Vlad. Well, Ukrainian officials say that Russia targeted their capital with both missiles and drones, hitting several different districts in the city, including residential areas. Now, we have seen this kind of attack over and over again during more than 3 years of war in Ukraine. On this occasion, dozens were reported injured, including children. Meanwhile, many others took shelter in the city's subway system.
So Holly, now this attack comes after the president accused the Ukrainian leader Volodymyr Zelensky of harming peace negotiations over his refusal to recognize Crimea as part of Russia. And correct me if I'm wrong, Holly, is the White House also asking Zelensky and the Ukrainians to concede all of the territory in addition to Crimea that's been lost in this war?
It's a little bit complicated. Let me get into it, Vlad. The White House says that President Trump's patience is wearing thin as he pushes for a peace deal that reportedly includes excluding Ukraine from NATO membership and all the protections that brings, freezing the fighting close to the current front line. And remember that Russia currently occupies around 20% of Ukraine's territory, and recognizing Crimea in particular as part of Russia. Russia, of course, seized Crimea by force back in 2014, the first time that Vladimir Putin invaded Ukraine. Now, Ukraine's President Volodymyr Zelensky has responded to that by saying that officially recognizing Russia's occupation of Crimea would be against Ukraine's constitution. So that appears to be a red line for Ukraine and perhaps one of the sources of President Trump's frustration. The background to this, of course, is that the Trump administration has essentially upended America's policy on Ukraine, not only opening direct dialogue with Russia, but also briefly suspending military aid to Ukraine back in February after that contentious meeting between President Trump and President Zelensky at the White House. The fear in Ukraine now is that if President Trump doesn't get the peace deal that he wants, the U.S. could potentially cut off all aid to Ukraine permanently. Now, the U.S. has committed over $100 billion in aid to Ukraine since this war began, and that has covered things including not just weapons and ammunition, but also paying the salaries of thousands of Ukrainian first responders. So if Ukraine lost that crucial American aid, it would be a disaster for ordinary Ukrainians.
Wow. All right. Holly Williams reporting for us from London this morning. Thank you, Holly. Appreciate it. Okay, let's bring in CBS News White House reporter Olivia Rinaldi to talk more about this. So, Olivia, the president has lashed out, I guess, if that's the word that we want to say, over social media to Vladimir Putin over this latest attack in Ukraine. What more are you hearing from the White House this morning?
Well, Vlad, they're growing increasingly frustrating at not only Ukraine and President Zelensky, as we heard Trump talk about yesterday on True Social at Zelensky, but now he's directing his anger towards Putin. On True Social this morning, he wrote, "I am not happy with the Russian strikes on Kyiv, not necessary and very bad timing. Vladimir, stop. 5,000 soldiers a week are dying. Let's get this peace deal done. Pretty striking to hear him call him by his first name, the Russian leader by his first name, and tell him to stop. I'd be curious to see how that is being received in Russia. But Vlad, I think it shows the growing frustration out of this White House in dealing with both sides of this war. Now, this is a war that the president said he would be able to end on day one. I believe we are at day 93 or so of his presidency. Double check me on those numbers, but this war is still ongoing and it's still raging. So this White House is growing increasingly frustrated at both sides that they're not able to get any type of deal done. At the same time, we saw Secretary Rubio and Special Envoy Steve Witkoff pull out of talks yesterday in London that would have been held with our European counterparts and the Ukrainians about this proposed peace deal to get this war to an end. They pulled out of those conversations, but today we know that Special Envoy Witkoff is headed to Russia, where he will meet with Vladimir Putin for the fourth time for discussions on how to bring this war to a close. And as you heard Holly lay out there in expert detail, what the White House seems to be suggesting is that the current lines of the war would be where the lines of demarcation would be for two new countries, for Ukraine and Russia. For the Ukrainians, that's a non-starter. For the Russians, it would mean not only obtaining Crimea as they did in 2014, but also expanding their reach into Ukraine. But it seems, by all accounts, with these increased attacks and strikes, that they're not ready to end this war either. So the White House seems to be at a little bit of an impasse with both Ukraine and Russia.
Yeah, sounds about right. Vladimir's stop is triggering to me. It reminds me of my mother screaming at me as a 5-year-old to not touch the stove or not stick a coin in an outlet. It clearly did not. That's why it's so triggering to me. So we'll see if it works with a dictator who controls one of the world's superpowers. Let's turn now to tariffs. Olivia, President Trump seems to be changing his tune towards China. You could almost have predicted this because we talked about this before. The Chinese do not have the worry about elections or polls or people protesting in the streets. It's just not something that is of concern to them, whereas this president does. So what's the latest with these quote-unquote negotiations? Because there always seems to be a 2-week time. Everything the president says is going to happen is always under a 2-week timeline. So what are we expecting in 2 weeks?
Well, and the Chinese don't have to worry about people buying their goods. If not the United States, there are a plethora of other countries that are going to buy cheap Chinese products. So they're not exactly worried about these tariffs being levied by the United States because they're saying, well, that's on you and you've started and you've initiated this. We heard from the president yesterday, though, telling reporters in the Oval Office that some of those very high tariffs on China, that 145% tariff that's on some Chinese goods, is going to come down some incrementally. Take a listen to what he had to say here about these ongoing negotiations he's having with the Chinese.
Yeah, we are going to have a fair deal with China. It's going to be fair.
Are you talking to them actively now?
Actively. Everything's active. Everybody wants to be a part of what we're doing.
Now, the White House says they're talking to about 90 countries now, upping that from 70. We have yet to see a list of who exactly they're talking to and what these negotiations quite look like. They're holding this very close to the chest. But I do want to note that the Chinese have called any type of conversation about negotiations happening between the U.S. and China as fake news. They say there are not ongoing conversations. These are not happening actively. And this White House is continuing to press and say that, look, we might have to switch and change the way we're handling these negotiations with China, as we heard Scott Bessent say earlier this week, Vlad.
Yeah, I mean, it's relatively easy to suggest, as the White House is, that there are active negotiations with trading partners because obviously the market likes that. But then when you get the Chinese suggesting that they've heard nothing, it leads one to wonder what's actually happening behind the scenes. Olivia Rinaldi reporting for us from Washington this morning. As always, appreciate it, Olivia. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right, Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent says the U.S. has that opportunity for, quote, a big deal on trade. You're taking a look at the Dow right now, which is relatively flat. Let's bring in CBS News Money Watch correspondent Kelly O'Grady, who's joining me here in Studio 55. So, Kelly, still waiting and seeing what these tariffs could potentially mean, what this new approach could potentially mean. You heard Olivia, Chinese say they're not talking to anybody.
Yeah, it's definitely a wait and see, and it's going to be a wait and see for a while, because if you're an investor, think about it. The sort of things that you're getting, they're coming. Besson is saying one thing, Trump is saying another, China's saying another. And so you just get this trickle of information every time that the president speaks to reporters. And that's really hard to manage your investment portfolio. It's really hard for a business to manage their strategy when they're probably ordering things now for seasons ahead. So I think you are going to see a lot of this up and down, because also let's remember, I mean, even if trade deals are going to happen, that often takes months, even years, if you go back to how long a deal with China took during Trump's first administration.
So as you know, companies like Pepsi, Merck, they've all lowered their outlook because of these tariffs that the Trump administration has levied. We know that some CEOs have been in Trump's ear, suggesting that this is not good, this policy, this economic policy that he's pursuing. When could we see the effects of tariffs on earnings?
So I think you're going to see the effect on maybe revenue and profit come next quarter, because remember, these tariffs going back to April 2nd, that's really going to affect what we see them report come the summer. But you are seeing them revise these forecasts. And already some companies are saying that their suppliers are telling them they're going to raise prices. So that's where you see the guidance coming. They're factoring that in, and they're telling investors, they're warning investors, look, this is coming. I'm really interested to see what Alphabet does. This afternoon, they're reporting after the bell. Google, of course, big driver of their revenue is ad revenue. And if you think about that, it's a lot of businesses, small businesses, large businesses that are looking to get consumers to buy their products. If they think that tariffs are going to impact consumer buying, they may spend less. So that's sort of something that I'm looking in terms of reading the tea leaves from Google.
I've also seen that some CEOs and some companies are canceling orders, existing orders that they've already had, because they know that bringing those goods into the country are going to mean higher prices for consumers. You also have some data on unemployment and housing. What can you share?
I do, yes. So this just crossed the tape. We got jobless claims. This is a weekly number that we get of people filing for unemployment. It was pretty stable. It was just up slightly, 222,000 versus 216,000 last week. It's a good number going into the jobs report next week, because it basically tells you people are not getting fired at the rate that we might fear with all of this concern around tariffs. Home sales, some good news, some bad news. The good news is that inventory actually increased 19.8%. That's a good number. Yeah. We want to see more houses on the market. The bad news, we saw the slowest March home sales since 2009. So that goes back to the pandemic. Think about this, though. This is existing home sales. These are people that were buying in January and February when you had mortgage rates above 7%. So that's probably why you saw that. Really interesting. All right, Kelly O'Grady, great to have you. As always, thanks. All right, nearly 50,000. Oh, yeah. Nearly 50,000 people have been able to pay their respects to Pope Francis in less than 24 hours as he lies in state at St. Peter's Basilica. Entry to the church was supposed to pause at midnight, but officials kept it open to accommodate the large number of mourners. The public viewing comes to an end tomorrow. I want to bring in Catholic journalist Austin Ivory. He's written 2 biographies about Pope Francis and one with the Pope himself. Thanks so much for joining us.
Good to be with you, Vlad.
So we see the large scale of crowds coming to view the Pope's body. How does Pope Francis's viewing compare? For example, I recall John Paul II, that funeral. That was a much more elaborate sort of circumstances. I know that Pope Francis has scaled some of that back for his funeral, but how would you compare the two?
Well, I think in both cases you see huge numbers of people arriving in a very short time. I mean, I too remember 2005, and what was shocking back then at the time of John Paul II's lying in state was that suddenly these people appeared particularly from Eastern Europe and the Central Europe, flying in on what were then kind of budget airlines which had just appeared. And I remember the cardinals here being really shocked, where all these people come from. And hundreds of thousands came to Rome over those days. We're seeing something very similar here. I think the difference is that, the Pope is Argentinian. Actually, if this were a funeral going to be happening in Latin America, you'd see even bigger crowds. These are crowds made up of pilgrims from across Europe and, of course, pilgrims who are here for the Jubilee, but it's been a constant stream of people wanting to go in and pay their respects. There's a very special relationship between the people and their Pope, and we're seeing that here today at the moment. They're giving back the love that they've felt they've had from him these last 12 years.
The number of cardinal electors is getting smaller as well. What are we learning about that, and how will that impact the voting process for the next pope?
Well, a couple of cardinal electors have said that they are unwell and that they can't travel. This always happens at every conclave. In other words, we have the number who are invited, told to come to Rome. The under 80 cardinals, the electors as they're known, there are 135 of them. They all received a letter saying, come to Rome. If you're over 80, you can come, but you don't have to. And inevitably, some of those cardinal electors are not yet here. We had this morning in the meetings that the cardinals are holding every day, 103 present, which means more than 2/3, so they can proceed with making decisions. But we will see in the next few days, in the lead up to the funeral on Saturday, more arriving. There are various reasons why cardinals can't come straight away. We won't know the final number of cardinal electors actually until next week.
Really interesting. Austin Ivory, thank you very much, sir, for spending some time with us. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
We'll, of course, have full coverage of the Pope's funeral Saturday morning. We'll begin with Nora O'Donnell's historic interview with the Holy Father. Pope Francis I will stream at 3 a.m. Eastern on Saturday. That will be followed by live coverage of Pope Francis's funeral. The CBS News special report begins at 4 a.m. Eastern right here on CBS News 24/7 and streaming on Paramount+. Still ahead, why a federal judge is temporarily pausing her order in the case of the man the White House mistakenly deported. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Police in New Jersey have charged a 19-year-old with arson in connection to the massive wildfire that is still burning in the southern part of the state. Authorities say he lit a bonfire with wooden pallets earlier this week and did not make sure they were fully extinguished before he left the area. CBS News Philadelphia reporter Brandon Goldner has the latest on the efforts to fight the flames.
Thick smoke is blanketing parts of Ocean County, New Jersey, as a result of this massive wildfire that is burning at over 13,000 acres. Take a look at this business right here. This business was destroyed as a result of this fire. You can see piles of rubble here. This was Liberty door and awning. Thankfully, no one was injured as a result of this destruction right here, but a lot of people say they're still feeling the trauma as a result of seeing this fire and having to evacuate. Now, we do know that more than 5,000 people, they are waking up this morning for the first time since they were having to evacuate on Tuesday. And many people actually decided not to come to their homes because of this heavy smoke that's still blanketing the area. Many people say it just was too much smoke that was going through the air. Now, we do know from firefighters they still have a lot of people out here trying to control this fire. It is 50% contained, though we do know that that may be updated through the morning. Firefighters are hoping that with rain forecasted in the area coming up later this week, that they hope that they'll have the fire fully contained by the weekend. So far, this one business was the only one that was destroyed. There are several outbuildings as well as vehicles that were destroyed as a result of this fire. There are a few local roads that are still shut down as a result of this fire, though the major roadways have since reopened. Throughout the day, we're expecting updates from the New Jersey Forest Fire Service. Brandon Goldner, CBS News, Philadelphia.
Let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with the first look at the national forecast. Andrew.
Yeah, Vlad, good morning. We've been taking a look at that fire and the smoke from the fire that has really continued to really blanket large portions of New Jersey, and believe it or not, portions of New York City and Long Island that will see the smoke. As long as this continues to burn, even a very light southwest wind, 5 to 10 miles per hour, is going to push a lot of the smoke up north and to the east. So areas even as far east as Suffolk County, New York, all the way out in Long Island, may see some of that smoke. Take a look as we head into the end of the afternoon today and into Friday. It's going to be more like Nassau County. A little bit more of that southwest flow will bring some of that smoke up toward the eastern end of Long Island. Now, Thursday brings out the new drought monitor across the area. And while we are still in a drought situation in New Jersey, it's in the moderate area here. So we're really not looking at it being exceptional, but it's just a good lesson to know that even if you're not in the worst of the drought, you will still, with dry conditions, gets fires and wildfires sparked off. Now, we will have some rain coming in. Today, we're watching for severe weather possibilities for Oklahoma and Texas. The next few days, though, this system gets itself together, heads to the East Coast, and some much-needed rain is going to be headed for the area as we head into your Saturday, hopefully helping out with some of those wildfires. We'll take a look more at some of the severe chances coming up in just a little bit. Vlad?
All right, Andrew Kozak for us. Thank you, Andrew. Appreciate it. The case of mistakenly deported Kilmar Abrego Garcia is on hold yet again. The judge demanded an update on the government's efforts to facilitate his return by 6 p.m. last night, but extended the deadline. So joining me now is CBS News legal reporter Katrina Kaufman. Hey, Katrina.
Hi, Vlad.
So tell us what this decision means and where we stand right now.
So the judge in the Abrego Garcia case has now stayed her order for the government to turn over discovery in that case for 7 days. And the thing that is interesting about this, Vlad, is both parties agreed to this. And the day before it happened, the judge had issued a scathing order, essentially accusing the government of willfully disobeying her. She said she didn't think that they were acting in good faith. The fact that Mr. Abrego Garcia's attorneys are on board here could indicate that there is something going on behind the scenes that we don't know about. This is all under seal, so maybe they feel like the government is finally taking action to bring Mr. Abrego Garcia home. We will hopefully learn more next week.
The administration is also defending some of these deportations in a new court filing, saying the Defense Department is the one that carried out these deportations, not DHS. What does that mean?
Yeah, so there's this case in Massachusetts, and the government is saying that they did not violate an order from a judge that said the Department of Homeland Security couldn't deport these men at issue. They weren't supposed to deport them to a third-party country. And they say that it's because the Department of Defense actually did it. They say DHS didn't direct them to do it. There were no DHS personnel on the plane, and the Department of Defense is also not a party in this lawsuit. So they're essentially saying that they're not responsible because this was carried out by the Department of Defense. Something that could come into play here is there is a federal law barring the military from participating in civilian law enforcement. So that's potentially something that could be brought up. Maybe DOD wasn't supposed to be involved in this at all.
Fascinating. All right, Katrina, thank you very much.
Thank
Always
you.
great to have you. Coming up, how President Trump's tariffs are impacting small businesses as major retailers warn his actions could lead to empty shelves nationwide. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Welcome back to CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following. That was the moment Israelis stood still this morning to mark Holocaust Remembrance Day. The sirens across the country lasted for 2 minutes. The annual tradition is designed to remember the 6 million Jews murdered during the Holocaust. Traffic comes to a halt, people stop in their tracks, and the country comes together in silence. Earlier, Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu spoke at the Holocaust Memorial, Yad Vashem, and vowed Israel would never surrender. We're learning new details about why the suspect in the Florida State University mass shooting has yet to be charged. Tallahassee police say the suspected gunman, Phoenix Eichner, is being treated for significant injuries before he's formally charged. The 20-year-old was shot once in the jaw after police say he killed 2 people and wounded 6 others last week. The state attorney will determine charges, but police say it will likely include first-degree murder. Tensions are mounting between India and Pakistan this morning in the wake of the deadly attack in the Indian-controlled region of Kashmir. Pakistan denies any involvement in the assault, but in response, India has closed its main border with Pakistan, expelled diplomats, and is putting a key water-sharing agreement on pause. Kashmir is a disputed territory claimed by both India and Pakistan and has been a flashpoint for decades. 26 people died during this latest assault. Officials say it is one of the worst attacks the region has seen in decades. All right, earlier this week, the heads of some of the largest retailers met with President Trump to warn him that his tariffs could soon lead to empty shelves at big box stores. But what about the impact on small businesses here in the United States? So joining me now is the former head of the Small Business Administration, Isabella Gusman. She's also the chair of the Global Risk Advisory Council and the founder and president of Avenida Advisors. Thank you so much for being with us, Madam Secretary.
Thank you, Vlad. Great to be here.
So this is your first interview since leaving President Biden's cabinet, and now you're in charge of a body of more than 100 former head of states, ministers, and other public affair leaders. Can you describe for us how these leaders are reacting to this evolution of tariffs that have happened over the course of the nearly 100 days of the Trump administration.
That's right. And we have these preeminent leaders from over 17 countries across Latin America, Europe, Asia, representing over 58 industries and really reflecting on what are the reputational risks that firms are facing now in this environment. And now, especially looking more closely at the impact that tariffs are having on firms that are doing business abroad.
So, given your perspective on international economies, who is being most affected by these tariffs? I mean, clearly American consumers are going to be affected, but it feels like there are different levels of pain, and the way that countries operate and the way that some economies differ from ours may also play an impact in how those tariffs impact them versus how they impact us, which I think is going to be hard felt.
It is going to be hard felt, and especially we are talking about small businesses in particular who have to face these risks and uncertainty without the cash reserves that typically larger businesses may have, or without the supply chain diversity that larger businesses may have. So clearly, their impact is going to be stronger. The short-term pain is going to be much harder felt on all of them. And across the board, as businesses who export abroad, and 1 million small businesses export their products and services abroad, or those who import, 2/3 of small businesses rely on some sort of imported product or service. And so truly the impact is going to be wide sweeping across the board. And as they're doing business abroad and trying to still engage in these markets, there are risks, reputational risks for the United States right now that is seen as a challenging partner. And so, they're facing it for their brands and their images that are so tied to the United States, trying to do business abroad. That's really coming out as an emerging risk that brands are going to have to manage, trying to figure out, how to best, support their brands in markets that they typically trade in.
What is in your opinion, the risk that countries no longer see the United States as a reliable trading partner and thus begin to trade with each other, even if it means smaller revenues, because there are very few countries with the size and the consumer appetite of the United States, but given the volatility, there may be some companies and some small business owners who don't want to engage in the volatility that is inherent in the Trump administration and thus begin to look at other ways to do business.
Well, and that's what we're hearing from across the world, that it is risky doing business with the United States. And so there's concerns about whether or not they should continue to engage. And I do believe that, as these small businesses in particular spend so much time and effort trying to enter in markets abroad or import from countries abroad in their supply chains, that takes a lot of effort. And so truly, this up and down in this trade tariff discussion is really having an impact on them, and the volatility is going to have lasting effects, regardless of where we land as we're going up and down in escalation, de-escalation. The damage has been done for a lot of these businesses. And you're hearing from small businesses in particular who've maybe already had to abandon product abroad that they were planning on shipping in and trying to figure out how they could sell it in other markets already, or businesses that are changing their forecasts and planning for the future, betting on not being able to sell in markets abroad. So this is really having an impact. And if you can imagine, a small business owner in particular that has to weigh all these challenges themselves, this is one that is becoming draining for so many of them, and may lead to early closures of businesses or massive debt.
Yeah, that was going to be my final question, which is, could we see small businesses fail? I talked to one owner of a small business on CBS Mornings Plus last week, and she was describing some of the material that she imports for her clothing line, zippers that come in from China, and for example, to give one example, and if they're not able to pass those costs along to consumers, because let's face it, Americans, the reason we shop at Walmart and Target is because you want to spend less. Maybe the big box stores are not as affected as a small business owner, but could we see these small businesses collapse and fail?
Yeah, and you see these large retailers, coming in trying to navigate these tariffs. The small retailers, don't have that voice, but they're having the same issues. And so, truly, they're trying to pivot to new supply chains here in the U.S. But that was difficult for them in the first place because they don't buy at the levels that larger businesses do, and they may not have the cash flow to to plan in advance and create that kind of inventory, deep inventory. So for small businesses, these questions, these challenges are much more intense, and frankly, they don't have the capital or the cash reserves to really play in the marketplace as risky as this.
All right, former Small Business Administrator Isabella Gusman, thank you so much for joining us this morning. I appreciate it.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Okay, moving on to this now. There's a new FBI report that reveals that scammers and cybercriminals stole a record $16 billion from Americans last year. That is a 33% increase from 2023. CBS News Department of Justice correspondent Scott MacFarlane is following this and several other major stories for us this morning. So, Scott, I watched your story this morning on our show, CBS Mornings. The FBI called ransomware the largest threat to infrastructure in 2024. Describe for our audience the numbers and why we're seeing a jump in these crimes.
Yeah, this caught our eye, Vlad, because the FBI threw around the word staggering to describe what's happened over the past year, and they're not ones for hyperbole. The increase in people falling victim to crimes on their phones, on their tablets, on their computers just soared up to $16 billion minimum reported in criminal activity against people on their phones through identity theft, data breaches, and others in a year. That's up from about $12 billion the year before. That's a $4 billion increase, and about a quarter of it, people over the age of 60. The FBI is struck by these numbers so much, Vlad, because they've been taking down these ransomware networks, these big organizations engaging in fraud, yet the numbers are still going up. And there's a few reasons for that. First of all, there are more and more people carrying more and more devices. Our parents, our grandparents are now more connected than they used to be. But also, the techniques are getting more sophisticated. You use those artificial intelligence tools as a fraudster, you're able to perpetuate a more effective scheme. Fewer typos, fewer red flags people find in those bad emails and bad text messages and know it's a scheme. It is a more sophisticated world, and the fraudsters are capitalizing on that.
In the report, there was a man who was a Vietnam veteran who lost some $2 million, and I guess the way that he was approached it's gotten so good with the use of AI. It's hard for people to know whether something is fake or real.
We get those, easy pass, text messages saying, "Give us your money." You kind of know something's off there. You get those emails with an international or foreign email address. You know something's off here, or the Nigerian prince. This is a little bit different now. It's becoming more perfected, and what the victim from Virginia told us was it looked real. He Googled the names involved. They looked legitimate. The back and forth involved multiple people. Much easier to fall victim to this. The FBI is trying to sound a siren here, Vlad, because the would-be victims need to know what they're encountering is more sophisticated.
Yeah, indeed. Scott MacFarlane for us. Scott, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, let's dig into Prince Harry and Meghan Markle. They made a rare public appearance last night in New York City to call attention to the dangers of social media. The couple unveiled an art installation called the Lost Screen Memorial. It honors children who lost their lives in part to harm suffered online. Our partners at the BBC spoke exclusively with Harry and Meghan.
Well, the easiest thing to say is to keep your kids away from social media. The sad reality is that the kids that aren't on social media normally get bullied at school because they can't be part of the same conversations as everybody else. Life is better off of social media. I say that as a parent, and I say that as someone who's spoken to many of the kids here tonight who aren't on social media because they've lost a brother or a sister to social media. But clearly enough is not being done.
Families of some of the children who died as a result of social media staged a demonstration outside of the Meta's New York City offices and presented the company with a petition calling for reforms. It's a fire drill, folks. We're all good. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Tens of thousands of mourners are pouring into Rome to pay their respects to Pope Francis ahead of his funeral on Saturday. That includes a class from Michigan who was on a trip that their teacher hopes they will never forget. CBS News Detroit reporter Veronica Ortega has that story.
Michiganders are joining tens of thousands of people from around the world at the Vatican to pay their respects to Pope Francis before he's laid to rest on Saturday. That includes a group of students and their teachers from the Metro Detroit area.
A long line of visitors enter St. Peter's Basilica, where Pope Francis lies in state.
I went by St. Peter's earlier, and it was just very somber.
Anna Fedor is with a group of students from Gabriel Richard Catholic Church in Riverview, Michigan. They were looking forward to seeing the Pope.
We knew he was sick. You know, we prayed and hoped we would get to see him. We don't get to see him, but we can feel him.
This is Anna's 11th trip to Rome. She's been lucky enough to be in the presence of Pope Francis twice.
Here with students, I saw Pope Francis an outdoor blessing. I got to see Pope Francis in Mexico City with two of my best friends.
There are lines every corner you go trying to get in, stretched, I don't even know how long. It's unbelievable.
But she's never seen crowds this big.
What a testimony to a man's life who was so kind. You know, people that aren't just Catholic have a deep respect for Pope Francis. Over here, they call him Papa Francesco.
Anna and her students are headed back to Michigan Friday before the Pope's funeral.
To be here during these historical times and to see the room, just to see the Sistine Chapel is amazing.
It's a trip they'll never forget. For CBS News Detroit, I'm Veronica Ortega.
All right, folks, the NFL draft, it's happening tonight. Coming up, we're going to tell you who are this year's favorites to get picked first and who to watch as teams look to ramp up their rosters. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. Future football stars hope to hear their name called tonight in the first round of the NFL draft in Green Bay. The Tennessee Titans have the first overall pick, and experts say they will choose quarterback Cam Ward from the University of Miami. I want to bring in CBS Sports NFL insider Ryan Wilson for more on this. Ryan, good to see you, my friend. So who are some of the other top stars whose names could be called tonight that will have an immediate impact in their rookie year?
Good morning, Vlad. Good to see you. Cam Ward's going number one, and unless something unforeseen happens, that feels like a done deal. At number two, the Cleveland Browns are currently set to pick there. Travis Hunter is going to be the pick, but the real question is whether the Colorado star and Heisman Trophy winner ends up going to Cleveland or whether a team is going to move up. And I should say teams plural because there are several teams that are interested in Travis Hunter. A name to keep an eye on are the Jacksonville Jaguars there. By the way, at three, Abdul Carter, the New York Giants, they feel like a marriage. The Giants need a quarterback, but Abdul Carter is one of the best players in this draft. The other name I'll mention quickly, Ashton Genty, the running back out of Boise State, he could go as high as 5. I don't see him getting past pick 10, where the Cleveland Browns currently find themselves, and I had them going there in my final mock draft.
So who are your risers and fallers in the draft?
So this is a defense-heavy draft. A year ago, it was primarily offense in the top half of the first round, but Jalen Walker, the off-ball linebacker, edge rusher out of Georgia, has a chance to be a top 15 pick. He's undersized, but he is incredibly explosive, and NFL teams love him. Matthew Golden, the wide receiver out of Texas, has a chance to also be a top 15 pick. Do not be surprised if the Dallas Cowboys at pick 12 target him to give Dak Prescott yet another weapon. And then finally, I'll mention Will Howard, and this will be a conversation for perhaps day 2, which is the Friday part of the draft, rounds 2 and 3. The quarterback at Ohio State helped lead that national championship team. He has an opportunity to hear his name called tomorrow, not in the first round, but certainly in rounds 2 or possibly round 3 for Will Howard.
And on which side of the field are the strengths of this year's draft, the defense or the offense?
Yeah, you got it, Vlad. It starts with the defense. If you need edge rushers, if you need defensive linemen, and then also if you need a running back or a tight end, this is the draft class for you. The weaknesses are going to be the quarterback position. This isn't like last year's class. Only 2 possibly quarterbacks go in round 1. And then the wide receivers and cornerbacks are going to dry up early. So if you need one of those positions for your team, you better get them on day 1 or day 2.
All right, Ryan Wilson for us, breaking it down, my friend. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. All right, let's bring back CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Andrew Kozak with the last look at the national forecast. Hey, Andrew.
Hey, Vlad, we are looking at some big changes this week. A lot of folks getting in on the brand new drought monitor here showing that we have the desert Southwest down over Texas, an extreme to severe drought. We need the rain down here. We also, of course, need the rain up and down the East Coast, especially across New Jersey, where we have still been dealing with that wildfire. The Jones Road fire continues to burn with over 15,000 acres. Meantime, the rain totals over the course of the next 48 hours giving us a little bit of a good sign here. We have a system that is getting itself together in the Midwest and is going to spread east with a good solid ½ inch to an inch of rain for at least the eastern half of the country. That will be moving into the weekend across portions of New York, New Jersey, Saturday along the East Coast, up and down the I-95 corridor. Going to be a day to bring those plans inside. If you have outdoor plans Saturday, have a plan B. But the good news is that by Sunday, things are looking much nicer. Today, at a glance, 74 degrees for areas like New York, 79 as you head toward Louisville. We'll have temperatures, even despite the rain, in the 70s and 80s across much of the Midwest. Beautiful, by the way, and cooler across areas like Los Angeles and over towards San Francisco. Tomorrow, we start to see that rain inch to the east a little bit, where temperatures will stay in the 70s, mild up and down the East Coast. There's Saturday. There's the rain. It starts to cool off a little bit. Behind that on Sunday, we'll have beautiful sunshine rolling in, but temperatures a lot cooler for the second half of the weekend. 50s up toward Boston, 60s for New York, and over toward areas like Philadelphia. And then we'll have another chance for a little bit of rain and possibly a couple of storms for the midsection of the country. Meantime, we're still dealing with some cooler and drier weather across the desert Southwest. And after all the fire danger we had out here, we are finally getting some of that wind to die down as well. Vlad, by this time next week, by the way, heads up, some areas along the East Coast could be looking at their first 90-degree day. Stay tuned for that.
All right, Andrew, thank you very much. Appreciate it. That does it for me, folks, but stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo Diwe is live from San Francisco with all the breaking news from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.